There's a box of white powder that almost every Amish family keeps in the kitchen pantry or laundry room. It costs only a few dollars, and most people think of it as nothing more than a household cleaner or a laundry booster. But in the Amish community where I grew up, that same box also has a place on the gardening shelf. Long before expensive garden products filled store shelves, the Amish had already learned how to use it in many different ways to care for their gardens. It can help control ants, slugs, and certain garden pests, help prevent some fungal problems, protect outdoor wood, and even provide an important micronutrient for plants when used correctly. That box of white powder is borax. Today, I'll share some of the ways the Amish have used borax in their gardens for more than 100 years. Not as a miracle product that replaces everything else, but as a simple, inexpensive ingredient that, when used correctly and in the right amount, can help you save money while still keeping your garden healthy and productive. Few garden pests are as frustrating as the growing number of ants that seem to appear after a few hot, sunny days. At first, it's only a handful of ants wandering around your vegetable beds or tomato plants. Before long, though, you'll see long trails of ants marching across the garden, building nests beneath raised beds, around containers, or even along the edge of a greenhouse. Ants don't always feed on your plants directly. What concerns the Amish more is that ants often protect and move aphids onto tender new shoots so they can feed on the sweet honeydew the aphids produce. In return, the ants drive away beneficial insects that would normally prey on those aphids. Before long, the new growth can become covered with aphids, the leaves begin to curl, plant growth slows, and harvests become less productive. Many gardeners respond by spraying insecticides or simply crushing the ants they see crawling across the ground. But Amish experience has shown that this rarely solves the real problem. The ants you see are only the foragers. The colony itself, with hundreds or even thousands of ants, remains safely hidden underground. Instead of trying to kill individual ants, the Amish let the ants carry the bait back to the nest themselves. The method is simple. Mix about 1 teaspoon of borax into 1 cup of warm water. Then add about half a cup of sugar and stir until completely dissolved. Soak a few cotton balls in the mixture, or pour it into a small bottle cap and place it directly along the ants' trail. The sugar attracts the ants to the bait. As they return to the nest, they carry tiny amounts of borax with them and share it with the rest of the colony. After a few days, the colony gradually weakens from the inside. The hardest part of this method is patience. When you see large numbers of ants gathering around the bait, don't rush to wipe them away or kill them. If you do, they won't have time to carry the bait back to the nest. Simply leave the bait undisturbed for 2 or 3 days, and you'll often find the ant trail disappears without repeatedly spraying pesticides. That said, borax should always be used responsibly. Place the bait where children and pets cannot reach it, because the sugar makes it especially attractive to them. With just a small amount of borax and a little patience, this has become one of the ant control methods that many Amish families have passed down from one generation to the next. If there's one garden pest that can make you regret an entire week's worth of hard work overnight, it's slugs and snails. During the day, you rarely see them. But after a cool, damp night, your lettuce, leafy greens, strawberries, and newly transplanted seedlings may already be badly chewed. Tender leaves become covered with holes, the edges are eaten away, and shiny slime trails are left across the soil. After just a few nights, An entire vegetable bed can suffer significant damage. Many gardeners go out at night to hand-pick them or set beer traps. Those methods can work, but they're time-consuming, especially in larger gardens or after several days of rain. In Amish communities, borax is sometimes used as a protective barrier rather than being scattered throughout the entire garden. The method is simple. Once the soil and plant foliage are completely dry, sprinkle a very thin ring of borax, about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch wide, around the base of the plant or around the vegetable bed you want to protect. The important thing is to apply it only to the soil and avoid getting the powder directly on the stems or leaves. This dry layer of borax forms a barrier that slugs and snails are reluctant to cross. When their soft bodies come into contact with the powder, moisture is drawn away from their surface, causing them to avoid the barrier or become dehydrated if they try to crawl across it. However, the Amish always emphasize that less is more. There's no need to cover the entire bed or apply a thick layer. A thin ring, placed in the right location, is usually enough to protect your plants while using less borax and reducing the risk of affecting the soil. After heavy rain or thorough watering, the borax barrier will dissolve. If slugs and snails are still a problem, simply apply a fresh, thin layer. This is also a good time to remember one important rule. Borax is not something you should spread throughout the garden as a year-round preventative. Using too much can cause boron to build up in the soil and eventually harm your plants. That's why the Amish use it only as a temporary barrier, only where slugs are causing problems, and only for as long as it's needed. With this simple approach, many young vegetable plants can make it through their most vulnerable stage without relying on expensive commercial slug control products. Cockroaches may not feed on vegetables or damage plants the way caterpillars and slugs do. But if you have a garden shed where you store seeds, fertilizer, animal feed, or gardening tools, chances are you'll encounter them sooner or later. During the day, they seem to disappear completely. Once night falls, they emerge from cracks in wooden walls, behind storage shelves, or beneath bags of seed. They live behind droppings, contaminate tools, chew through paper packaging, and can carry unwanted bacteria. Once they begin breeding inside a shed, their numbers can increase surprisingly fast. Many people reach for insecticide sprays, but in small spaces like a garden shed, where seeds, livestock feed, or freshly harvested produce are often stored, the Amish generally prefer methods that require less spraying. One traditional approach is to mix equal parts borax and either flour or powdered sugar. After mixing thoroughly, they apply only a very light dusting in areas where cockroaches are known to travel, such as behind wooden shelves, beneath cabinets, behind storage bins, or along the base of walls. These hidden locations are favorite hiding places for cockroaches while remaining out of reach of children and pets. The important thing is not to scatter the mixture across walkways or on surfaces used for food preparation. The goal is to place the bait where the cockroaches live, not to spread it throughout the shed. As cockroaches crawl through the powder, tiny particles of borax cling to their legs and bodies. While grooming themselves, they ingest the borax and are gradually affected by it. Because it doesn't work immediately, the cockroaches have time to return to their hiding places, where they may come into contact with others in the colony. That's why the Amish don't expect overnight results. They usually leave the mixture in place for several days before checking it again. If it becomes damp or dirty, they simply replace it with a fresh batch. A small amount, placed in the right location, is often far more effective than spreading it large quantities throughout the shed. Once the cockroach problem is under control, the Amish sweep up any remaining powder and continue keeping the shed clean, dry, and well organized. Because they believe the best way to prevent cockroaches isn't simply to kill them, but to keep them from finding food and shelter in the first place. There is one plant disease that almost every gardener has encountered at least once. At first, it appears as just a few small white spots on the leaves. It looks as if someone has dusted the plant with a thin layer of white powder. Many people assume it's just dust and pay little attention to it. But within a few days, those white patches can spread surprisingly fast. The leaves begin to yellow, curl, and gradually dry out. Cucumbers, squash, zucchini, and roses are often among the first plants to be affected, especially during periods when the days are hot, but the nights remain humid. Unfortunately, many gardeners don't take action until nearly the entire plant is covered with the white fungal growth. By then, saving the plant becomes much more difficult. The Amish follow one simple rule: don't wait until the disease has spread throughout the garden before doing something about it. As soon as they notice the first few infected leaves, they remove the ones that are heavily affected to reduce the source of infection. Only then do they consider additional treatments. In some Amish households, a very small amount of borax is occasionally diluted and used as a supplemental treatment for leaves showing the earliest signs of powdery mildew. However, they always view it as a supporting measure, not a cure. More importantly, they focus on improving air circulation, reducing moisture that lingers on the leaves, and preventing the disease from spreading further. That's why the Amish space their plants properly, regularly remove older leaves near the base, and avoid watering the foliage late in the afternoon. They understand that fungal diseases thrive when leaves stay wet for long periods, so improving growing conditions often produces longer-lasting results than relying on any spray alone. If you decide to use borax, remember one very important rule: never use more than necessary and never apply it frequently. Borax contains the micronutrient boron. In very small amounts, it can be beneficial in certain situations, but excessive use can scorch leaves or lead to a buildup of boron in the soil. The Amish often say that when dealing with powdery mildew, the first thing to address isn't the white coating on the leaves. It's the conditions that allowed the fungus to develop in the first place. When plants have better airflow, leaves dry more quickly after watering, and the disease is caught early, the garden is usually much healthier without relying heavily on fungicide sprays. There's one problem many gardeners don't think about until the growing season is already underway. It's not insects. It's the mold that quietly develops in places most people rarely notice. A damp corner of the greenhouse, the north-facing wall that rarely sees sunlight, a shovel put away after the rainy season, or seed trays stacked in the shed all winter long. At first, it's just a few gray or black spots, but if left alone, they gradually spread, create a musty smell, and become a place where fungal spores can linger. Every time you bring those pots or tools back into the garden, those spores have another opportunity to spread. The Amish believe that if you want healthy plants, the place where you care for them should be clean first. That's why, before every new growing season, many Amish families dedicate a day to cleaning the entire greenhouse, potting bench, seedling shelves, and all of their gardening tools. Borax is one of the products they commonly use for that job. They dissolve borax in hot water, then scrub areas where mold or stubborn algae has built up over time. After scrubbing, they usually allow the surface to air dry instead of immediately rinsing it with plenty of water. This helps leave the gardening area cleaner and less favorable for mold to return. Pruning shears, shovels, hand trowels, seed trays, and old plastic pots are also cleaned before being used for the next season. Because if a seed tray still carries soil and disease from the previous year, you may accidentally transfer those pathogens to healthy young seedlings. Of course, borax is no substitute for keeping your gardening area dry and well ventilated. If the greenhouse stays damp, the air doesn't circulate properly, or tools are always stored wet, mold will eventually return. The Amish always address the root cause first. They open the greenhouse to improve airflow, allow tools to dry completely after use, and store them only after everything is clean and dry. Borax is simply one tool that supports that routine. It's these small, consistent habits that have helped many Amish families keep their greenhouses and gardening spaces clean for years, without relying heavily on expensive specialty cleaning products. Sometimes a tomato plant appears perfectly healthy. The leaves are lush and green, the stem is thick, and the branches keep growing vigorously. But when flowering begins, the blossoms start dropping one after another. Or the plant does set fruit, but the harvest is far smaller than expected. Many gardeners assume the plant simply needs more fertilizer, so they continue adding nitrogen. Yet the more they feed it, the more leaves it produces, without improving fruit production. The Amish understand that besides the major nutrients, such as nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, plants also require very small amounts of micronutrients for normal growth. One of those micronutrients is boron. Boron plays an important role in pollen development and helps support successful pollination and fruit set. When soil is truly deficient in boron, certain crops, such as tomatoes, broccoli, cauliflower, beets, and even apple trees, may show symptoms including excessive blossom drop, poor fruit set, or abnormal growth. That's why some Amish families occasionally use borax as a source of boron to supplement the soil. However, they treat it as a solution only when there are signs, or good reason to suspect, that the soil is deficient in boron, not as something to apply routinely every year. The Amish follow one very strict rule. Borax is not an ordinary fertilizer. A very small amount is all that's needed. Using more than necessary can scorch leaf edges, cause yellowing, and lead to excessive boron buildup in the soil that may harm plants over time. For that reason, they always measure borax carefully according to appropriate recommendations and use it only when it's genuinely needed, never by guesswork. According to practices that have been passed down in their communities for generations, only a tiny amount is applied evenly to the soil around each plant. When the soil is healthy, the plants receive adequate sunlight, consistent watering, and balanced nutrition. That small amount of boron may help support better flowering and fruit set where a deficiency exists. Borax serves only as a supplemental source of boron in boron-deficient soils. It is not a shortcut or a substitute for proper garden care. Over more than a century, the Amish have continued to garden in a remarkably simple way. They don't immediately reach for the latest products whenever a problem appears in the garden. Instead, they first look around their home and make the best use of what they already have. Borax is one example of that approach. With nothing more than a box of white powder that costs only a few dollars, They have traditionally used it to address a variety of common garden problems, from ants, slugs, and cockroaches to certain cleaning tasks around the garden, and even as a source of the micronutrient boron when the soil is genuinely deficient. The important point is not that borax can replace every pesticide or fertilizer. It's that they understand when to use it, how much to use, and what purpose it should serve. That careful, practical mindset is one reason these gardening traditions have been passed down through Amish communities for generations. Smart gardening doesn't always mean spending more money. Sometimes, simply understanding your plants, using the right materials wisely, and avoiding unnecessary waste are enough to save a great deal of money while keeping your garden healthy and productive season after season.